You know, Illinois has been home to many famous poets. Ernest Hemingway was from Oak Park. Carl Sandburg was from Galesburg. Gwendolyn Brooks made her life in Chicago. So on this season of Prairie Fire, we thought we'd introduce you to some poets you may not have heard of. The first one is Michael C. Holloway. Michael Clark Holloway was from Mattoon, Illinois originally. By the time he died in 2022, he'd published 3 books of poetry. His work has been performed throughout the United States and throughout the world at universities, clubs, on stage, and off. His work was well loved for integrating the struggles and the mundane aspects of everyday living with a sense of humor and musicality. He was a consummate Midwesterner in appearance and tone, but he was a student of the world. He loved modern art, music, and a good drink.
She's a groove. She's absolutely wonderful. She's full of energy. She's real peppy. A lot of spunky, super perky, peppy, spunky, perky, brisk. She's vibrant and hearty, and breezy, and lively and sprightly. She's quite vigorous, forceful, powerful, domineering, overbearing, meddlesome, arrogant, dictatorial. In other words, a real drag.
We're joined now by Michael Holloway's wife of nearly 50 years, Penny Hanna.
Thank you for being here, Penny.
Glad to be here.
Tell me a little bit about Michael's childhood. How did he become a poet?
His mother said he was a busy boy. He was always thinking. He was an active person, but he lived in his mind more than his body. So he wrote things down because he always said, writing is just another form of thinking. And so from childhood, he was writing.
Throughout high school, he did more poetry and then ended up at the University of Illinois, right?
Yes, he did some theater work. He was a good observer of human behavior by that time, having been in school all those years. So often he could invent characters and imitate characters. His heart was in the arts, really. And so he was interested in music, though he had no music training, and performance was important to him, how you perform what is written or composed. So he worked a lot with musicians. So Sal Martirano in the composition and Herbert Brunn.
He was very interested in modern art as well.
Yes. A lot of his poems reference paintings, particularly Gauguin and Cézanne.
He started as somebody that didn't have much background in music, but then he ended up with his association with Sal Martirano,
Yes.
forming kind of a group of spoken word combined with music.
Well, he had a lot of things that he taught himself, and he had old guitars when he was a kid, and so he taught himself some things. He had a very good ear, and he could reproduce sounds. I mean, he could have been a singer, but it wasn't his style.
So tell me about their biggest collaboration.
So it was called LGA. It's well known in some parts of the world more than here. It stands for Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, and now you will find references to that all the time.
Now we are engaged in a great civil war.
Michael played a character called the Politico, who was dressed strangely. So he had a gas mask and an aviator's helmet covering his whole face, sunglasses, and a motorcycle jacket and white trousers. And he did the choreography, the moves. And so he recited the Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, but he divided into 3 parts, and there were 3 different characters speaking. And then in parts, he added some updates of his own writing. It's interpreted as an anti-war piece.
He was also very good at capturing kind of the Midwest sensibility, Midwest life, the mundane aspects of everyday life.
Yes.
One great example of that is this poem, Walking Up on a Green Down Coat.
Walking up on a green down coat. at the cold, damp, late winter, first of the season outdoor track meet. My wife is leaping around, for her slightly like an idiot, more like an adolescent. Goodness, how my 14-year-old son has grown and wears his mother's coat quite well.
I'm interested in the idea of what it was like to live with a poet.
Yeah, the trick question.
He was a tortured poet. Was he always taking notes on napkins? Was he completely hard to talk to all the time? I mean, what is it like to be married?
Okay, real life. Michael had a grasp of things that nobody else was going to think about. There was a woman who was a colleague at Parkland, and she said of him once, Michael Holloway says things that no one should even think about. He was making things happen that were of his imagination and in reference to the world. He thought that you observe very carefully everything around you, the colors, the shapes, the people, the sounds, and then you live that experience fully, and then you create something from it, basically. So living with him, he would be tuned into things you wouldn't know about. He liked less disturbance. So during the time we had little children and we were raising them, he didn't write that much because he would rather be with the child, experiencing that and seeing how they acted and what they were interested in and helping them live the adventures that he had in his head. The reason for the overalls is he had the bib with the pockets. He kept note cards in the pockets. By his bedside were note cards and a pen. So he was constantly writing.
Michael was as masterful at setting kind of beautiful, peaceful, serene scenes as he was writing these irreverent, almost sometimes rude poems. And I think the poem Winter Window Wide is a beautiful example of that.
Winter window wide. I dreamt a chandelier fell, crashed, and scattered across the floor in shards, when actually my breath had frozen, fallen and shattered in mid-snore, by my head on the pillow as I lay sleeping in bed.
Michael wrote a lot, but he didn't receive a huge amount of notoriety for his work. Why do you feel that was, and was that something that he even wanted?
Getting noticed takes a lot of work too, and he didn't want to do that work. If other people got it going, that was good. He didn't have the drive for that, and besides, he was working part-time as a teacher, and we had 2 kids, so there was a little like, okay, teachers and part-time teacher salaries don't pay for a lot of things, so yeah, I don't think he was that concerned. He believed that the poetry should live in live performance. He thought that was the way you produce the work and people notice it. When invited to do a reading, he would do a reading, paid or unpaid. So he was into exhibiting it, but not all that business stuff that goes with getting promoted. He didn't feel disappointed in that. He did submit poems to Poetry Magazine several times, and they kept saying, this is really good stuff, this is beautiful stuff, we want short poems. He liked to focus on big concepts like habit and time and memory, and irony was one of the big hooks, contradiction, paradox. At a reading, he would say, well, what do you want to hear, poems pleasant or poems unpleasant? And that was a joke, but, he went from very serious and magnetic, beautiful, wavering, wandering poetry to ridiculous, hilarious.
You mentioned that Michael liked to employ irony in his poems quite a bit. You had an example of that.
Well, we were getting married at the courthouse. So 2 friends, Michael was in his overalls and I was in my go-to-teach at high school clothing. And so a man comes up and says, can you sign this? And he was looking for signatures to be a delegate to the Democratic National Convention. He was so interested in telling us, he then realized, wait, all these people are dressed. Why are you here? He says to everybody. And he looks around and Michael says, well, we're here for court. And then he says, well, what? And he says, well, my Penny was arrested for shoplifting, and I am the witness against her. And the guy says, oh, really? And he says, yeah. Nobody cracks a smile. Nobody smirks or grins. And then he says, well, stutters and leaves. 3 years later, I walk into the same man, and he says to me, how did that trial work out? And I couldn't remember what he was talking about. And I said, trial? He says, yeah, at the courthouse, you and Michael and some people who were there. And I said, oh, my God. He's putting you on. And that would be a perfect example. And I don't know how many people he told that I was a shoplifter, but that's pretty indicative that he bought the whole thing.
Hanna, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
For more information about Michael Holloway's life and poetry, visit our website at will.illinois.edu/prairiefire.